And we are live. So, welcome to this new book news reading, celebrating writers whose books were published during the pandemic lockdown. My name is Karen Schubert, and I'm the director of Lit Youngstown, a literary arts nonprofit in Northeast Ohio. We have programs for writers, readers, and storytellers, including a new book news reading on Sunday, November 1st, 1 week from tonight, featuring Alana Bell, Susanna H. Case, and Mervyn Taylor. Many thanks to the Natalie and James Andrews Foundations for support for this series. More information is available at lityoungstown.org. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm very pleased to feature these three writers today, and congratulations to them on their publications. We'll follow the readings with a conversation about these books. Pamela Anderson is a traveler, a lover of blues music, hiker, yoga practitioner, wife and mother, and former fundraiser for public radio. She has an MFA from the Northeast Ohio Master of Fine Arts program, and her new book is Just the Girls, a Kaleidoscope of Butterflies, a Drift of Honeybees, published by the Poetry Box. Welcome, Pam.
Thank you so much, Karen, and thanks to Lit Youngstown for hosting. It's such an honor for me to be here reading with Marjorie and Jonathan. And I will give a shout out to my publisher, the Poetry Box Press, and Sean Evaningo Sanders. I'm really so grateful for them for publishing this book. So this chapbook basically came to life when I decided that I wanted to write a poem for each of the young women in my life who inspire me today, my daughter, my daughter-in-law, nieces, my sister. And I wanted to do a little holiday gift for each of them by writing a poem. But once I wrote the poems, I realized that if I looked back at my other work and I thought about many of the female mentors I had in my life, I realized I could assemble it into a book, and that's what I did. And that's how this book came to being. So the chapbook basically is divided loosely into three parts. There are early years with poems dedicated to my sisters, my mother, my grandmother, my aunts. And then there's a little section of yoga themed poems marking one of the big turning points in my life. And then finally are the poems that celebrate some of these fabulous young women and women I'm connected to in my life. So I'm going to read a poem from each of the first two sections, and then and they're kind of short, but then I'll read about three from the last section. So the first one is The Blue Dress. I am not the one in the blue dress, the one with trim ankles, foot cocked to the side, with the heel just touching the arch of her other foot. I am not the one in the middle either. That girl has her head thrown to one side, right elbow attached to her hip, arm rising in a half V, cigarette smoke twirling from her fingers. I am the one you hardly notice, the one turning away, standing at the edge of the picture frame. I am the one with the hand lifted, palm out, as if to push back your eyes. I am the one half shaded by the birch tree. I am the one who is ready to run. And then a little poem from my yoga collection. This is really one of my favorites in the whole collection. And I dedicated it to one of my favorite yoga instructors, Danielle. And it's based in hot yoga at Davidson in Davidson, North Carolina. 30 minutes into hot yoga, someone groans, Jesus. And he shambles into the studio with a mat tucked under one arm and an eco-friendly water bottle dangling from his index finger. His hair twists into a thick top knot, and his bare feet disturbingly pale and blue-veined, slap against the floor as he unravels his mat and stretches. It must be 100 degrees inside, a sweltering hotbed of cheetahs, crows, warriors, and mountain climbers, with Jesus being the real standout. He rises into a column as vertical as wood smoke before folding like a deck chair into down dog. When he flips into a one-armed handstand, everyone suppresses the urge to applaud. No one is bold enough to invoke God. And then from this, the last little kind of loose section of the book, this is a traveling poem that I wrote to my goddaughter, Alex. Starts in Cleveland and it ends in Portland. So that's a nice trip by Amtrak. So it's called The Space to Be. Just past the deck, the lake plumbs deep before it thins and slips into a tiny fortress of scrub brush. Beyond that, the towpath meanders east-west toward the turnpike and Cleveland's Amtrak station, where you board Lakeshore Limited to Chicago. You catch Empire Builder to pass through Wisconsin, then Minnesota and North Dakota. Hay bales speckle fields, quixotically softening this tight-fisted climate. It would be hard to live here, but that's not the plan anyway. In Whitefish, you pause for a whistle stop because the stuffed bighorn sheep showcased inside the station is beautiful and strange. It's a quick hop to Washington State before the southbound curve propels you into Portland with its cascades of water and luscious tangles of onyx and emerald. This is the place. Here, you will find the space to be. Here, your heart will pry itself open. It is brave to pull back the covers of a heart as you have, to slip silently past the lake beyond the deck. And then this next poem is dedicated to one of the two young female artists who created my book cover. They did a terrific collaboration of this cover. And the poem also, it's called Shine On You Crazy Diamond. So it is a nod to Pink Floyd's concept album, The Wall. And this one is for Meredith. Ink jets from your fingertips in needle-sharp streams, darkly confused and mysterious until you give it shape. One flourish coils into a woman whose eyes rattle silently. Another streak swaggers and twirls in exuberant vines that halo into spikes around her head. You have created her. She is a woman who shines and glitters, whose rage will shatter every barricade, snarling at her margins. Your ink, slicks of ebony under her feet, infuses her with power. And I say, shine on, you crazy diamond, shine on. And the last one I'll read is the title poem. And again, thank you so much, Karen and Lit Youngstown, for putting together this series. But this is a little bit of a longer poem. It's kind of my funeral instructions. Just the girls. Invite just the girls to my funeral. My daughter and my dead sister's son's wife. My other sister and her two girls, her granddaughter too. Don't forget my daughter-in-law and my gay nephew, who, truth be told, has always been one of us. Invite every one of my girlfriends, those living on the far coast and the ones from town, the cancer survivors, MS sufferers, diabetics and heart attack victims, the tall ones and the short, plump and rail thin, gimpy-kneed, hip replaced and bad-backed women, include them all. Dance and sing at my funeral, play instruments, tambourines, guitars, maybe a flute. definitely drums. Shake the rain stick with vigor. Spill out red wine and mimosas, Bloody Marys, hot and spicy, and a queen's table of food. Hand pies and pizza, pasta and pancakes with real maple syrup and Kerrygold butter. Green and black olives, no pits. And expensive cheeses. Chocolate cake, key lime pie, and full fat ice cream. Forget about calories and carbs. No dieting at my funeral. No tears either, only laughter and silly games. If you have a horse whose name is the last thing you ate, what is her name? Ice Cube. If your last text is the title of your memoir, what is it? I love you too. No corpse at my funeral, leveraging my green burial option, but digital photos cycle every 10 seconds showing only the most attractive me. I pose wearing a hat, at favorite vacation spots, New Orleans, Montreal, and Reykjavik, Prague and San Francisco, Anna Maria Island and Savannah. Images mask my disappointments and anguished nights. They erase battles that brought me to my knees and moments that broke my heart, but ultimately not my spirit. In every picture, I appear happy, carefree. The girls gathered at my funeral will never divulge my lapses in judgment or wild-eyed indiscretions. They will wrap their lovely, warm arms around the memory of me, cradling my secrets with their own. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pam. Our next reader is Jonathan Jackson Jr., a poet from Youngstown and recently transplanted to New Orleans. Jackson began writing in college and enjoys writing music as well as poetry. His new book is In Not So Many Words, published by Chiron Publishing House. Welcome, Jonathan.
Hello, hello. I just wanted to start off by thanking you, Karen, and Lit Youngstown for inviting all of us to this reading this evening. Um, I actually, because of COVID, the book came out at the end of May, kind of when things were peaking and getting crazy everywhere. So I actually just had my first reading from the book last week, actually. So this will be the second time that I'm reading from the book. So I'm kind of excited about that. And basically, the how this book came about, how I got the idea to collect all of these poems into one place, was because I was in the process of moving and I actually lost my portfolio of poems that I kept with me from like when I first started writing when I was like 14 years old. And not being able to like find them, I feel like I kind of lost like a piece of me almost in a way because those were like some of the first things that I can remember committing to like poetry when I decided that that was something I wanted to do. So I kind of went crazy, like archiving all of my voice memos and every like piece of notebook paper I could find with like all of my poems and things on there. And I started, as I went back over them, I started to notice a theme um, that was kind of present where it was me voicing and putting to word feelings that I wasn't necessarily able to always share with everyone, kind of just feeling the stigma of um, first as a man, like we're not supposed to be attached, super attached to our emotions, kind of, and especially in the Black community is something that is often, I won't say frowned upon, but it's something that you're supposed to, your most intimate feelings, you're not supposed to share. You're kind of supposed to just deal with them on your own and be kind of stoic about feeling love and feeling hurt and feeling angst and all of these things. And so, with the social climate that we're in now more than ever, I felt the need to kind of offer a look at the humanness of who Black men are, and that our gamut of emotions is just the same as everyone else's. So it was a very good release for me to kind of just go through and process a lot of these feelings that I had repressed for so long and that I hadn't really shared with anyone. So this was my first foray into publication. So I'm kind of excited that it's over with now because it was a lot to deal with, but I'm happy that it's out there and that the reception has been what it has been. So I'll just go ahead and start. And all these poems, they touch on a barrage of different topics, just a bunch of different emotions all over the range of emotions. So I'll start with one that is untitled. I bled all over my salvation. Ripped open wounds love couldn't cauterize with a passion unsurpassed by the heat of 1,000 suns. Words that capsized the unspoken desires of my diary stilled my lungs, plucked my voice from my throat as my mind became mute. I threw myself into the wind with reckless abandon, with no direction to throw my emotion in, seeking that which was never hidden in plain sight, all the while leaping into my eyes. And in them I found a stranger I'd known all my life. With no legs to carry me, I took up his bones and walked. Then I have another short one here. This one is called Eye Drought. The well ran dry. He felt, he hurt, but could not cry. Made a wish, but the well ran dry. And that was nice little short one. I actually wrote that one on the bus one day because I was so frustrated with everything that was going on, like with life and in the world at the time. And I couldn't cry for some reason. And I just wrote that down and it kind of helped me get through that moment. This next one is one of my favorites. It's inspired by one of my favorite music artists because I am a songwriter on the side. So a lot of music informs the writing that I do. And this one was inspired by Erykah Badu. It's called But It Won't Let Go, a Baduism. I tried, but could not wring myself clean. I bathed in hyssop and holy water for 27 days, fasted and prayed for 7 days. In that new moon, I was dark as her reflection still, had not waxed nor waned. I tried to make my feet remember the rhythm of joy, tried to shout, but my feet could not catch the syncopation of the dance. I read until my eyes were as dry as a stranger's hello. Still, I could find no refuge. The next night I waited, nose to the floor, a moment above a kiss, screaming for God to say anything. I prayed for 40 days of rain and then 40 nights of the same, hoping that I could be made new. And in the most still, small voice, I heard God utter wait. And I thought, duh, bleach. This next one is called Run. Run into the wilderness, for this sanctuary you will find, ensconced amongst bramble of worn and withered vines. Run, dive deep into the waters, for Yemaya will always keep safe her sons and her daughters. Run against the wind, let it take you from home. Run with the wind, let it teach you how to roam. Run until your body cries and your feet bear your blood. Run into yourself, run into the mud. Run, make the breath of life the pavement of your track. Run with the breath of God, a zephyr on your back. Run. And I have two more. This next one is called Bed Peace, and it was actually the first poem that I had published. Sunlight sneaking through the blinds slowly settles on your face. Arousing you from your slumber, you wake and kiss the day. Whisper a word of thanks with gratitude on your lips, one for each new breath and use of every limb. Take peace from your bed, Keep that joy in your mind as you walk into a world that has left theirs behind. See that in all odd favor you find in it the invisible. Just past misery's mirage does lie your miracle. So seek it out in earnest, never this forget. Keep it in the pocket with the peace from your bed. And this last one that I'll read is called Black Boy, and it just addresses some of the angst that I felt during the social climate of the time that we find ourselves in right now. Black Boy. There's a crimson river pooling on the concrete. The fruit of the poplar tree ripens in the street on primetime TV. Some eyes wide, some eyes cry, but every eye wonders why. This woman's baby, that baby's father, a baby's father, sling, target practice, brown body game, a 10-point stag mouth agape as if to ask, what am I? What am I? Protected and served. The conclusion drawn, evidently his being is wrong. The crime, they say in not so many words. Black boy, black boy.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Marjorie Maddox has published 11 collections of poetry, the story collection What She Was Saying, 4 children's and YA books, including I'm Feeling Blue Too, Commonwealth, Contemporary Poets on Pennsylvania. And her new book is Inside Out, Poems on Writing and Reading Poems with Insider Exercises, published by Kelsay Books. Welcome, Marjorie.
Thank you so much. And I just have to say right off the bat, what a great honor to read with both Pam and Jonathan. And you both read my favorite poems in the entire books for your first poem. So that was kind of exciting for me. I was like, wow, you can read my mind. So I was really glad to see it. Big thank you to Karen. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen just to show you a little bit about this book. Oops, I'm host disabled attendee screen sharing. So I think maybe you have to make me a co-host, Karen. Okay, here we go. All right. So this book is primarily, well, maybe even not primarily. It's kind of geared toward YA and middle grade authors, but I really think it's a book that can be used and loved and enjoyed by poets of any age. So one of the things that I really wanted to emphasize in this book was to take away that sense of intimidation that some younger poets have or some younger students have about being afraid to kind of enter into the poem, thinking that there's some kind of key that they don't know about to unlock to write poetry. So I wanted them to kind of step inside the poem to learn about the poem. So I start out with poems about how to see, hear, touch, and taste a poem. Then I have a series of poems that explain various terminology. And then a series of poems about how to write fixed form poems. So how to text a triolet, that's a triolet. How to write an English sonnet, that's an English sonnet. And then I end with some exercises that are directly connected to the poems themselves. So I'm going to read several of these poems and tell you a little bit about some of the exercises as well. How to see a poem. Close your eyes. What swims behind your lids lights imagination. Sometimes you'll recognize flecks of what is or what was. Sometimes specks of speculation will filter in, or fine strands of never, never land will land in the inner world of mind. Just keep not looking into what's expected until you're free to see with vision that's beyond the ordinary. And then you'll see how to hear a poem. It's shaped like the canal of an ear. how to touch a poem. Forget distance or that anemic wave you save for mere acquaintances and great aunts. A handshake's not as good as a grab, but both beat polite observation. Best to clasp this well-themed friend forcefully, no stomping poetic feet, with the firm embrace of a long-lost brother. This is a hands-on operation. The more fingerprints, the better. So, in this time where we can't hug and touch as much as we would like to, you can certainly hug and touch a poem. So I'd like to, this is a place where I'd have students kind of pause and write about how to touch a poem or how to smell a poem or how to see a poem. Befriending a poem. Invite him home for dinner, but don't insist on rhyme. He may be as tired and as overworked as his distant cousin cliché. Best to offer intriguing conversation that's light on analysis. Allow for silences and spontaneity. Most importantly, like any good friend, be faithful and patient. Remember to listen. Sometimes he's shy and just needs a little time and coaxing. Much of what he has to say lies between the lines. And so this might be a place where I would encourage the students to take the poem someplace that they're comfortable with, or maybe write a poem that starts with a title like "A Poem Texts Me and Says," or "Talking Back to a Poem." And then I have these series of poems that kind of explain terminology. So instead of just kind of reading boring definitions, a poem that actually embodies that definition. Pun, a little jack-in-the-box joke waiting to spring its double meaning. Or dramatic monologue. Step into the words and become a prince, a pauper, a piece of popcorn, a philosophical panda, a paranoid piano. Slip forward or backward in time as Cleopatra or the president of Mars. No one will interrupt. The podium is yours. Go ahead and pontificate. And the Frankenstein poem on personification. All night, Dr. Poet, you sort through cartloads of dissected lines and post-mortem poems abandoned mid-century to the morgue of your mind. In the dim light of your underground laboratory, you toil over brainy ballads, eye-catching images, light-footed metaphors saturated with sound, your grand experiment in diction. As dawn pokes her fingers in, you painstakingly stitch heart to soul, breathe the hum of humanity into your creature's realistic lungs. It's no lie, he's alive. Pinch his cheek, and personification speaks. So I have a poem on onomatopoeia, and for this one, I will put all these onomatopoetic words on cards, index cards, pass them out to students. I teach at a university, but I also do elementary school and middle school and high school visits. So students will then act out the words, achoo, bah, things like that. Then poems, how to write an English sonnet, that's an English sonnet, how to write an Italian sonnet, that's an Italian sonnet, how to text a triolet. And then I'll read this one, how to write a villanelle. To write a villanelle, think like a bird that soars and swoops in 7 different ways and sings a song that you've already heard, returning to its favorite branch to perch. Become a sparrow, light and quick and gray, to write a villanelle. Think how the bird salutes you every morning undeterred from trilling what it always wants to say within its favorite song, the one you've heard so many times you suddenly are stirred to listen closer still, to find the way to write a villanelle, just like a bird that flits across your vision in a blur and leaves the sound of beauty in its trail, still singing songs that you've already heard. Next time you want to fly away on words, remember what we talked about this day. To write a villanelle, think like a bird that sings a song that you've already heard. And then for fishing for sestinas, as you know, Sestina repeats 6 words in a set pattern. So you'll see paper, dream, waves, fish, so right throughout. At first, there is only the paper, as plain as sleep without the dream, as flat as the sea without its waves, no sound, no ripple, no fish slipping in and out so suspiciously. Ah, now write that. Not worrying about wrong or right, but only what floats up to your paper, what your fishing pole of a pencil tugs so deliciously toward your eyes. Dream of letters swishing their fins, of fish bright as summer minutes, of waves that twist and flip and cha-cha-cha. Wave hello and reel them in. Words are your net. Write 1,000 buckets full of fish that slip about, splash till you and your paper are soaked with poems and all they dream. Too many? No need to even sew up the holes. The poems themselves sew together our world, the way fish in waves thread themselves in and out, the way dreams swim their own stories, can write themselves below the surface, the way paper can catch even the smallest fish floating within your mind. Let's fish together on quiet afternoons so still you hear the whisper of bluegills with their paper thin scales. They rise above the waves of your thoughts, trying to write up their own storm of images. Let's dream this water together, this lake of dreams brimming full of rainbow rhyming fish that glitter as they leap. Let's write the entire salty ocean, so full of creatures, they surf the waves, then scuttle across the flat sand of paper. Ah, the joy of pencil and paper that dream such jubilant waves, that fish for syllables so splendid, we cast our lines and write. And then one, of course, on writer's block, how to write yourself out of a paper bag. Sharpen your pencil and your wit. Bring a flashlight and a watch you can depend on, not to interrupt. And then these are some of the exercises, and I'm just going to quickly summarize one of the exercises. So here's one that has to do with using concrete instead of abstract words. So trying to focus on words that use sensory details or are sensory, as opposed to things that you cannot see, smell, hear, taste, and touch. So typically I have students put an abstract word into a hat and do it a little bit differently on Zoom, but to pick out an abstract word. And then we brainstorm a little bit about it, connect it to colors, sensory details, to various memories, and then draft a poem describing that word, an abstract word like love, hate, fear, envy, but not using the abstract word anywhere in the poem. Not worrying about rhyme or anything at this point, focusing on images and sounds. And then reading the draft to the other people in your group. Again, not saying the abstract word and seeing if they can guess what you were describing. So that ends up being a lot of fun, and it's just one example of an exercise in the book that's based on a specific poem in the book. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing here then, and that's it. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Marjorie. So I'm going to switch to gallery view here, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Pam, I wonder if you would start us off.
Yeah, I would love to. So I've been spending quite a bit of time with Marjorie and Jonathan, both of your books, and they've really inspired me in the writing that I'm doing right now. So I just want to ask you, Jonathan, I was so struck by the way your poetry is. To me, it's prayerful, it's celebratory, it's socially insightful, but most of all, it's the music that runs through it. So there are references to Billie Holiday, Erykah Badu. In fact, then that was making me listen to this music too, because I was reading your poems. So I just felt like I had this sort of musical background in my head the whole time I was reading your work. And so I have like 3 questions for you. One, I wonder how music and words weave together to inspire your poetry. And have you ever turned a poem into song lyrics? And then I wondered what you've learned about yourself as you wrote these poems and put this book together.
Thank you for that. So music, and I was really happy that you said that when you let me know that. And it always makes me happy to hear people kind of find the music in my writing, because I am a songwriter, and music has been, I went to college for music actually. And because it is such an integral part of my life, I find that it naturally lends itself very well to my poetry. Um, First, it was when I first started writing when I was younger. I had this like notion that poems always had to rhyme. And so I would look at song lyrics and like music, because I was obsessed with like reading the liner notes and like reading lyrics. And so one thing that I always try to do was model my poems kind of after a song, in the aspects of like every line has rhythm, it has meter, right? And those are things that you want to incorporate into a good song lyric. And as my writing evolved, I found ways to keep those kind of things with me. So from when I first started songwriting to when I kind of got out of the form of every poem has to rhyme, when I started playing with some different forms, I found the one thing of continuity that I always found was that I approach it um, as if it is a song, in a way, as if the piece is gonna be, as if it's hymnal almost, sort of like sacred music, because I went to church for a very long time, so I grew up listening to gospel music as well. So because the act of writing is something so sacred to me, I kind of associate it with like the hymnal part of gospel music almost. So I don't, it just finds its way in there all the time. All the time. And actually in the full manuscript of the book, I included some of the songs that I've written over the years. So a lot of these poems, some of them may start off as a song, like it'll be an idea for a song in my head. And then as I keep writing, I realize I don't want to constrain it kind of to that form. It doesn't allow me to express what I want to express fully. So I'll just go ahead and make it a poem. And then the reverse has been true as well, where I start like writing a poem and all of a sudden I hear the music in my head and I hear the harmony and I hear the vocal line, and especially after I listen to like Erykah Badu or Billie Holiday or something, I'm always super inspired just to write about the way that the sounds kind of make me feel, or there'll be a line that kind of I'll ruminate on for a while, and then that'll inspire a thought or something like that. So music is definitely a very, very important part of my writing. And as far as some things that I learned about myself while I was in the process of putting these things together, one thing I realized looking back on some of the older pieces that I included, um, I didn't realize how much um, of an understanding of poetry that I had coming fresh from like the music, and how well they kind of correlated. And when I started writing poetry, I will always like tell, like, I'm not a poet, I'm a songwriter, but I kind of, play with poetry on the side. And one of the things that I did learn was, no, you are a poet, and it is valid to take those same kind of expressions in that same form and be able to translate them into a song. And that's a form of poetry all on its own. So that definitely helped me with how I went forward and how I kind of started to develop the newer pieces. Was like, hey, this is something that you've been doing. It's just it just looks different, but it's the same thing.
Yeah. That's so interesting. Thank you. Thank you. Marjorie, let me just ask you for you. One of the things I love about your book is how playful it is. And as I started thinking a little bit more about it, knowing like the publication process, I realized, well, you wrote this book pre-pandemic, obviously, but how timely for it to come out during a pandemic, right? So, so I'm wondering, like, what has the reception been from people? Like, here we are in the midst of the pandemic. Now you have teachers, you have students, you have people, studying from home. And how I'm sure that's been a very unexpected, it's like this little gift. This poetry book is a little gift to people. So
Oh, thank you.
how has that impacted, and how are you seeing poetry, like maybe this potentially is, the pandemic could potentially be impacting new generations of poets in good ways?
It's funny because this book has been a long time coming. I mean, I wrote it 13, 15 years ago. I sent it out a lot. It was accepted by a publisher who ended up kind of sitting on it for 4 years, and then they went under. And then fortunately for me, Kelsay Books picked it up. And so that's worked out really well. And people have been wonderfully generous. So a number of children's authors who are also bloggers have kind of invited me or allowed me to come onto the blog and have allowed me to kind of showcase it that way. And so it's kind of taken off more than I expected it to, especially after such a long wait. And there is something really nice, I would agree with you about it's not nice not being able to get out and do the readings in person, but it is nice to be able to attend so many readings and give so many readings that I probably wouldn't have been able to give otherwise. And, the generosity of Lit Youngstown and Chiron and the hard work of people like that who have made this possible. So I think it did get kind of more of a push because of that in some ways. So.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Maybe I will jump off and piggyback off of what you said for Jonathan, because I was also thinking about this whole intersection of music and just loved, that's like basically one of the questions that I was going to ask. And I was also struck by your comparison to hymns, because it seems to me there's very much this kind of tug of war, or maybe that's too strong a word, more of an intersection between kind of body and spirit throughout. And I was really taken by that. So your explanation kind of went right along those lines. I also was really interested in this one line that you had in one of your early poems called, that said, between shadow and reality in its indifferent illusion transfigured. It's from that poem, He's Gotta Have It. And that seemed to me to be kind of a theme throughout many of your poems.
Yeah, so the way that I actually wrote that poem, I had I was like in a really bad bout of writer's block. And so one of my friends that writes, she was like, hey, maybe try like a word generator where you type in a word and then it'll give you like a palette of 20 miscellaneous words, and you just kind of go through and you put stuff together until it becomes semi-coherent, or you get inspired to do something with it. And when I got the word transfigured, that made me go back and start rewriting the whole draft of what I had. And that particular line, that part, well, the poem totally, but that line captures the sentiment the most, about how when people are faced with addiction, right? Because I'm from Youngstown, so I see there's a lot of different, crises is going on with different addictions and in the world, period, right? But we know the opioid crisis in particular is one that has a foothold on a lot of people. And I started to look at a lot of friends or people I knew that were struggling with some of those issues. And when I thought about it, it was almost judgmental at first. And then I had to reflect on some things that, I'm kind of obsessive over in my own life and addiction. We can all be addicted to many different things. And I thought, what is the allure? What is it if you know something can be bad for you, what makes you still want to keep coming back to it over and over and over and over again? And so I kind of thought about some of my own like things that I get hung up on, and I realized it was kind of like the illusion. So it presents itself one way, and even though we know that's not what it is, we buy into that illusion. It's able to transfigure itself into something that's appealing to us. And so one of the things that I started to look at for myself was, wow, that is, I'm approaching silly things like my infatuation with sweets, or some of or even deeper things like some of the relationships that I have. And it's, what is it that keeps me being drawn back to this thing? And it's the illusion, and the want to buy into the illusion, and to believe that this thing is what it is, that when it presents itself to you that way. And so that's kind of where that came from. So that whole piece is kind of me just working through that. What makes us want to give ourselves over to things that we know may not be the best for us? And that informed a lot of, especially like the pieces on love and relationship in the book. That is where a lot of that came from.
Oh, yeah. I didn't mean to jump out of turn with my question.
Oh, no.
But I was kind of excited about that. The phrases
Yeah.
that you use to describe your work with the hymns, etc.
Yeah.
Is it okay for me to ask Pam a question? Pam, I was really intrigued by the way you use objects and images to kind of jump off into the poems, like the pink shoe, the love letters from your father to your mother, the Jesus in the yoga class. So I was wondering if you could talk about how you kind of get from that image or that phrase or that, something that you see to the poem itself.
Oh, such a good question. So the pink shoe one, what I want to know, literally, I was driving down the road in Sacramento, from Sacramento to Placerville, and saw the pink shoe. And then I almost become sort of obsessive on these small points. So I started to obsess on that. I started to notice. I started to see more in my environment. In the Call Jesus Into the Room, the yoga instructor Danielle in one of the yoga classes said, it's hot in here. This is tough. We got to power through, say what you need to say, call out what you need, call Jesus into the room if you want to. And then boom, there it was. I just was kind of, again, almost obsessed with it. I begin then to see this in the environment everywhere. I literally came across my father's love letter. I think what I like to do is I'm trying to take one small thing and write around that thing. So like the shoe becomes a comment on society and what are we doing in society. But I want it to be narrow enough that anyone could read this and say, yeah, man, I'm seeing a shoe. I see this, I see that, So I want to make these comments, and, I want to make comments on society too, but a little bit, not sly is not the right word, but in the one where, the love letter, or the letter to my dead father about the Japanese girl who lives in my home, this lovely young woman who lived with us. And for my dad, who served in World War II, he would say, just like that, like he did in the poem, the Japs, this and that. And that is not the reality of it. It was this casual, almost we have this casual throw away words that are deeply hurtful or painful. And I couldn't help but reflect on what my father's words might have been when there was this gentle, loving, beautiful spirit living in my home, you know. So it's the sound of forgiveness. So I hope that answers the question. I feel like I've gone on a little long.
Perfect. Yeah.
I had a question also for Miss Pam, in particular about one of your poems, the poem "Baking Bread."
Yes.
That I just read that over and over, and I think because I had a personal connection with growing up cooking with my grandmother a lot and being in the kitchen with her a lot, and I found it almost like the beginning of it started to read almost as a recipe almost, and I kind of thought about that kind of correlation and how recipes are almost, they're like a portal kind of, because someone in the present is writing anticipating somebody in the future repeating this same act. And so I was just curious about how you came about that particular use of the imagery that you have and almost creating like this recipe like piece.
Yeah. Gosh, I really wanted to honor my aunts. And so, although, you know, baking bread was actually not anything that I did with my aunts. I never did, but I love to bake bread. And in the pandemic, everybody's baking bread, it seems like, you know, but what I really wanted, I was thinking of my grandmother's hands and what they look like. I really, really wanted to do something that honored these women from the greatest generation. I think my Aunt Audrey is 93 now. And it seemed like, because they were women who worked together, who worked with their hands, who created families, family situations, and this warm, loving feeling. And so the baking bread, it just felt like that was the right thing to honor them. The rising of the bread, the punching it down, the wrapping on it, you know, so that it sounds hollow. And then again, almost prayer-like at the end, offer something that's like a prayer. And so mostly it was just this idea of wanting to honor them and women of that generation, such hardworking and good women who were the center of a family, as bread is like the center of a meal. So.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, I really did connect to that one a lot. I enjoyed that piece a lot.
Thank you.
And then I did have a question for Miss Marjorie as well. I was really
Makes me feel very old.
I'm sorry. I can't help it. I can't help it. But I really enjoyed the approach of your book as somebody who is a goal of mine to get into a community space or setting where I can share the gift of poetry with younger people. But for me, it's kind of, I guess, where I get mixed up at is how to communicate exactly what you did for younger poets, and how poetry isn't intimidating, is something that everybody can have access to. I feel like that's a big one, especially with Black and brown kids, especially under-resourced kids, is they feel like, oh, that's something that's way too academic for me, or is something that is exclusive to like a certain community. And so I'm kind of curious about what made you want to go ahead and find a way to present that material to younger writers.
Well, I love going into like elementary schools and middle schools and doing these author visits. And a lot of the things I do are kind of just variations on what I do at college. You know, I just gear it a little bit more towards the audience. But, you know, there's something wonderful about working with kids younger kids, because you get that immediate reaction. They're not afraid to jump around and act some of these things out. When I'm working with like even kindergartners, I'll have them hold up signs of rhyming words, and they to involve their body, and get them involved. So you're not like lecturing them about it, you're getting them to play around with the language. And I think that's the key to not having them feel intimidated by it, to let them see the kind of the joy and the delight. I mean, I write about a lot of kind of heavy topics too. I write about, in my father's heart transplant, I write about domestic abuse, different kinds of things like that. So this is kind of an area where I can just have fun, and kind of spread that joy, I think, to kids. Because, I think we all grow up loving poetry, the nursery rhymes or the songs. And then somewhere along the line, someone tells us it's not practical. You can't make money on it, blah, blah, blah. And, forget that. You got to enjoy it. You got to go after your passion. Just like it with music as well, you got to embody it. So that's one of the things I think I want to share with them, that it can be a lot of fun, that they don't have to worry about right or wrong. They're experimenting. And, you want to get them kind of involved in that way. So that's what's been kind of exciting about this series for me. And then adapting it to Zoom, which is interesting. Yeah. So.
Very much so. I can imagine.
We have a few more minutes. Thank you for this wonderful conversation. I was wondering if you would each be willing to talk about your cover a little bit, because the cover of a book is a whole process in itself, right? Depending on how the press feels about it, if you're part of a series or an aesthetic, or if you have something in mind. So I'd be interested in knowing if there are any stories there.
I can jump right in on that. So here again is my cover. So this is the first book I've had published. I've had a number of individual poems published, but the first book. And my publisher, Sean Evaningo Sanders, was just great to work with. She's in Portland, so we communicated back and forth. And then it came down to the cover. You do all of everything else that goes into it, proofreading and so on. And I had some ideas. She made some suggestions. Nothing seemed to be matching up. And I said, I have these two young women. It's my niece and my daughter. And maybe they're beautiful, wonderful artists. Maybe they could work together. And to her credit, Sean said, go for it and send something to me. So I got in touch with Meredith and Liza and said, why don't each of you come up with something and send it to me, and then we'll see if something sticks. And then they put their heads together and said, let's work on it together. So Meredith did the drawing of this woman, and she's in Chicago. I'm in Kent area. So Meredith does the drawing. Then she emailed it to Liza, who's in Kent, who did the color part and the fine details of the bumblebee, and there's a butterfly in there. And then we sent it off to Sean, who loved it and put it together. And it actually just took second place in the all author cover of the month contest, which was pretty exciting. That was an international contest. So it was a long time getting to it, but then it came together really beautifully.
That's pretty cool.
Well, mine was also kind of a family affair a little bit. My husband helped design this. And Kelsay Books was great about saying, sure, if you want, this, do what you want and present it to us, and we'll see. And I love the idea of like all this kind of creativity coming out of the pen, which I thought went along very well with the poems themselves. Everything that's kind of all these poems, all these words that are kind of inside of that pen or the keyboard, I guess.
Yeah, there really is a lot of movement in these covers. How about you, Jonathan?
So my cover, I got to peruse the art school student side of me again when I designed mine, because I designed it myself. And basically how I came up with the crumpled paper effect was I wanted it to express the emotions that I had revisiting some of this stuff that I hadn't revisited in a long time, and sort of be a metaphor to throwing out feelings and then having to come and revisit them when I was writing the poetry. So I wanted it to kind of look like I pulled this piece of paper, you know, out of a trash can or something, and I was opening it and it was saying all the things that I really want to say a lot of times and can't really communicate often. I can only do it through my poetry or through my words. So that was kind of the effect or the statement that I wanted to make with that. And I had a friend, Whitney Miller. She kind of helped me with the typography piece because it was self-published. I started my own company, my own publishing company to publish the book. So I didn't have any graphic designer, anybody. They'd be like, yeah, no, that's a terrible idea. Don't do that. Don't mix that font. So she kind of helped me out with that piece. But that's pretty much where the concept of it came from.
That's great. I love that. I wonder if that's the same Whitney Miller who designed the Lit Youngstown logo.
I wonder. Maybe.
Well, thank you all so much. I just love spending this wonderful time with you, and thank you for sharing your work, and all the best to you.
Thank you, Karen.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank
Yes,
you.
thank you again.
I'll meet you